I've lost my gavel. But it's okay.
That's because you got carried away last
I
meeting.
did, but, you know,
It's
it
okay.
was so much fun.
The imaginary gavel.
Okay, let's start with a roll call. You want to start, Margaret?
Oh, yeah. Margaret Radeval will be taking the minutes.
Linda Winkler, Commissioner.
David Baum, Commissioner.
Leslie Stambaugh, Commissioner and Chair.
Pam Dent, Commissioner.
Dwight Wilson, Commissioner.
Vivian Chang, Commissioner and Vice Chair.
Jordan Jones, intern.
Okay. I've only got one person signed up. Do you want to speak? You may. I mean, no, did you want to speak? I don't, you can sign up too, but, and also, would you like to speak, or?
Is it the beginning or the end of the meeting?
In the beginning.
At the beginning?
You need a pen?
Sumi, since we haven't started, do you introduce yourself?
Sure.
Sure.
I'm Sumi Kailasapati, City Council member, liaison to the Human Rights Commission. 3 more months, then I'm done.
Well, I hope
There was an election
Well, we-
yesterday.
There
Yes,
was.
there was. So is anybody speaking? It doesn't look like it. Are you?
I'd like to use this. Sorry, I'm still
Certainly.
trying to sign it.
You have 5 minutes. Tops.
Hi. My name is Margaret Plews. I was born in Ann Arbor. I'm currently living out of county, out in Chelsea right now. But I spent a good part of the past 4 years back in Michigan here, like progressively becoming homeless. And through the course of that experience, I encountered the human service system in many different ways. And I have a lot of concerns about human rights issues. And I wanted to specifically ask this group to consider in the future looking at the incidents of violence against patients in the emergency room and in the probate court system and the psychiatric system, much like you would people who have been violated by police brutality. And the reason for that, and then you can catch up with me another time, that I'm going to start really agitating about people looking into this, is because nobody even calls it violence when somebody does something to your body without your permission, when they rob you of your consent by way of a signature, which actually I have a validated recipient rights complaint showing that a longtime professor and the head of the psychiatric unit at University of Michigan Hospital instructed a resident last March to lie, check the box saying Margaret Plews is a danger to herself or others, in order to be able to restrain me forcibly while I was crying, please don't do this, I'm a rape survivor, you're traumatizing me, so that they could extract from me my urine for a pregnancy and drug test, not for my medical needs, mind you, but because it was an administrative policy and routine at U of M emergency room until they did it to me. To do this to every woman they planned to admit to a hospital involuntarily, to protect that hospital in case that woman, unbeknownst to her, was pregnant. I mean, I had a 72-year-old partner, and I hadn't had a period in 10 years when they did this to me. But there's also a problem with simultaneously drug testing people at the same, women, you're testing for pregnancy at the same time. And you're doing it to a particular subset of women in this community who have already been rendered, you know, exquisitely vulnerable by virtue of their disability and all of the things that are associated with that. And so When you Google violence in the emergency room or violence against patients, you're not going to find anything about people taking a person, taking a woman, and holding her down, tying her down, while she's crying, "Please don't do this, you're traumatizing me," and forcibly catheterizing her to search NCs or bodily fluids that you have no right to even have. I mean, they rendered me incompetent specifically to do that. The resident even said so. The resident busted the guy who used to run the 9C, Michael Casher. He knew full well that was against the law. And I don't know, I was raped when I was 15, I was a virgin, and this was the worst thing that ever happened to me. When doctors, nurses, hospital security staff, all colluded. And it happens all the time. I knew that because I was once president of the Alliance for the Mentally Ill before I developed a mental illness. So, boy, that was really hard to say. I wasn't expecting to do that tonight. I was just going to write some stuff on your sidewalk about Rodriguez Montez Burks, who was a young black transgender woman who was murdered in Arizona or Michigan Department of Corrections a year ago. Its birthday is coming up, and I hope that as people on the Human Rights Commission and people living aware Ann Arbor, that people learn about this kid and hold the Department of Corrections responsible, because he wasn't just murdered by the man who was in the cell with, or she, I'm sorry. She wasn't just murdered by the man that she was in a cell with. Why was she in a man's prison anyway? The man who killed her begged the guards to get that fag out of here 10 minutes before he did. You know, she was killed by deliberate indifference, state violence. So, thank you. Yeah, have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a good start. Agenda. Any changes anybody wants to recommend to make on the agenda?
I don't have any changes. I'd just like to note that talking about the police task force and getting a progress report has been on the agenda for several months now. I don't think we've ever managed to get to it. So I just like people to be mindful that I think given how much has been happening, that like we probably are due to talk about it substantively. Agreed.
Anything else? Somebody might want to make a motion to accept?
So moved.
A second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. July minutes. Any discussion about the minutes? Everybody agree with the changes that are made? Somebody want to make a motion to accept?
I'll move to accept the minutes as amended.
Second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Strategic planning meeting. I looked at the doodle. It looks like September 23rd, which is a Sunday, is the only day that everybody can make it, and I talked to Jordan about it because she was the one person who said she couldn't, and it sounds like she will try very hard, or will be able to make it.
Yes.
So I think that's the day, 1 to 4.
Wonderful.
We do not have a 23rd. We don't have a place or any logistics set up yet, but we've got a beginning because we've got a date now. I sent out some a proposed agenda for the retreat, and this is obviously something, well, let me start with this. I think our last retreat, and I'm afraid I didn't look, but I think it was about 2012. It was a long time ago. It was very valuable in that it gave us a lot of direction. One of the things that we decided was to work on the non-discrimination ordinance, and we did that, and it took us 2 years, but, I think it was 2 years, but it was a very fine product when it was done, and it was very unanimously approved, and a very good product. And as we were ready to do the next strategic planning, and the other thing we talked about was doing community outreach, which we did somewhat in terms of the community response team, but we also started doing it again even recently. So it's been at the back of this organization's memory for a long time that we wanted to do community outreach, and we did that. But in 2014, of course, we had the Aurora Rosser situation and the need to talk about policing, and so that has taken up a lot of our time. So we've managed to, sort of with the guidance of the last strategic planning meeting, it really had an impact, and we are doing it. However, we're now at another part of our time, and we need another focus. So I started thinking about what it ought to be, and I'm certainly up for lots of input if you have it. But this is a pretty standard kind of thing to do. What I was thinking is first to we've had our intern Jordan spending a lot of time collecting information on homeless people and on mental health issues having to do with human rights. And those are two areas. We haven't had somebody whose primary focus was mental illness and homelessness since about 2010, I think. It's been a long time. I think only Linda and I know who she was. We have Corinne, who's done a good job, but she's doing it from more of a legal perspective, and we could use somebody who can do it from other perspectives as well, more social perspectives and human rights perspectives. I don't think we know about homelessness, and I thought that would be a good time for us to learn a little bit about it at the beginning of that meeting. And then I thought we should do a couple things to trigger discussion, and then to ask people to come up with proposals about what we should do, and then sell the proposals to us, and we decide on what we want to do. It's one way of doing it. So we'd brainstorm, and then maybe divide into groups and come up with some proposals from the groups, but people could also have some proposals that they come to that meeting with. And
Could I ask if the last time the HRC did strategic planning, there was a facilitator, or did you facilitate, or
I
what?
facilitated, I'm afraid. And you're welcome to have somebody else facilitate it. I don't think we have money to do it, but, this is something I do and as a management consultant, but if somebody else wants to do it, that would be fine too. But I thought I'd start this process. At any rate, that would lead into, once we have priorities, we know what kind of training we should talk about, what kind of training, including some just general, we talked about general cultural training. We also talked about outreach, and this might also drive what kind of outreach, if any, we want to do. So it seems like a good flow. I'm thinking 3 hours. I don't know if we can actually do it in 3 hours. On the other hand, I'm not sure people can sit for 4 hours. So, yeah, it's good. So what do you think? Is this any thoughts? Mm-hmm. Is this a plan?
Is this something that has to take place on government property, or? Because I know when we had the subcommittee to select task force members,
We had
considered having it at the library. I think someone told Pam that we had to have it in a government building,
Right.
so.
Legal told us that we had to meet on property so that it's not only available to the public, but potentially, it didn't have to be
Recorded, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause I know,
but it does have to be open to the public because it falls under the Open Meetings Act.
Yeah. Do we have to post notice of it?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So can we have that sort of meeting on government building space on the weekend, on just a Saturday,
We will
Sunday
find out.
afternoon?
I think we should probably can figure out how to do it.
Yeah, okay.
Is it a Sunday?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe CTN, if not government. I mean, CTN is kind of, but they're open all the time.
Well, the library is open too, isn't it, on
And
Sunday
I'm
in
not sure why not
September?
the library.
It is, but
We
I
were
was told that
couldn't,
we had
yeah.
to have it, all of our meetings on governmental property.
Because the three of us had wanted to have it at the library on a Sunday, like that, the way we wanted to be on the library on a Sunday, and someone told Pam, no, we couldn't.
Thank you.
Okay. So someone told us we couldn't, and so the three of us wanted to do it on the library on Sunday, so I don't know what's wrong.
We will have to find out. What we'll try to do is come up with the most comfortable. What happened? Oh. Turn it off?
You can share.
You are not speaking.
Yeah, so I just don't know if that would be possible to even meet on, if
I
the
think it's
Sunday
possible.
thing.
There's also a service center we've been offered at one point. I mean, there's got to be a place.
Yeah, I mean, we ended up changing it to a Monday in a government building, so I was wondering whether or not the Sunday-Monday difference was something that the city cared about too.
Don't know.
Okay.
But we will find out.
Margie also just mentioned that maybe one of the public school buildings.
We
Oh.
utilize the schools on the weekends when we've done testing.
Oh, really? Okay.
So she'll look into
I'll
it.
get some information on the options.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
Yeah, anything like that would be, and hopefully they will allow some food. I always think food is important.
That is important.
Anything else?
I mean, the one thing I did think about is that, you know, unfortunately, it seems that both of our city council member liaisons are going to not be with us for much longer.
Right.
And like, that's a separate consideration to have, like, if this is supposed to be like a bonding thing too, do we want to consider waiting for the new liaisons, or? Because they'll
Yeah.
be entirely replaced.
But not until November.
Yeah. So
I
I
don't
just
know.
wanted to put that out there.
And I don't know how, I mean, you know, in corporations, it is a bonding thing. People talk about a lot of more personal things that I think are not going to happen in open meetings. So I think this is more of a priority-setting meeting.
What governs when council does their retreat?
Go ahead.
I asked what governs when city council does their retreat, what governs?
It's not televised. We have it in the Justice Building. But it's open to public. Very few residents actually turn up for the meetings. So, but they wanted it more open because some people didn't like the fact that you had to go through the metal detectors and police. So then what they did was they had it at the basement of the Ann Arbor Public Library. There was a huge turnout. There were like 30 people.
Oh,
Yeah, usually it's like 2 or 3 people, but there were like, yeah, at least 30 people. So I thought that was pretty good to have it at the
Library.
downtown library. Yeah,
well, if they let the city council do it, maybe we can find a way to do it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a
If that's-
government building. It's not like we are having it at Pam's house, right? So I think it should be okay.
I was just going to add, I think Vivian's point's a good one, but I don't think it would be a problem to have this meeting without our new council people, and then perhaps in another 6 months, by the time the new assignments are made for the various committees, we could arrange some other gathering, perhaps to talk in more detail about whatever our top priority or two is. So I don't think I think we should just go ahead and then plan another meeting later if that seems appropriate.
I'm sure there'll be more to talk about once we start putting flesh on the brilliant ideas we come up with at the first meeting. Well, it takes follow-through, and that's a good way to ensure follow-through.
One thing I was thinking of is the task force is on schedule to present or make some type of presentation. And I believe September is that designated month.
Yeah.
I don't know if that will be forthcoming prior to our retreat.
Point.
And would we not want to incorporate whatever is to be presented from the task force in ideas or suggestions or projects that we may want to discuss at the retreat taking on? I just want us to be aware that that's going to be out there, and we may want to take on some responsibility for that. In terms of either involvement or recommendations, we've discussed in previous meetings things that we want the task force to take responsibility for, to address, and it includes agenda items for tonight's meeting, specifically the trespass issue. So I'm just wondering, I'm not opposed to anything that has been said, I just want us to be aware that that's to be forthcoming and to make arrangements to include that in our strategic planning.
Yeah. In the last police task force meeting, I think we spent at least 2 hours talking about the role of the future commission and how do we make sure that pertinent issues actually come to the commission, because it was noted, and I myself spoke about it, usually we tend to have class privileged people, even when we think in terms of diversity, whether it's black, white, but it tends to be people who populate these commission tend to be class privileged. So a lot of times, some of the issues that underclass face does not come. And one of the things was like, how do we do outreach besides having people from various classes being constituted as members of the commission? And there's like a lot of talk about like, this is going to be, the police commission is going to be unpaid commission members. I mean, how are we going to expect them to do police oversight, review, incidents review, and do outreach? So I'm not saying that we should be postponing this retreat because of that, but I'm sure aspects of the police commission, in order for it to be successful, there might be grassroots level things that we as a commission might be doing in order for them to be successful. So as long as we are mindful of that. So yeah, thank you.
Good point.
There she is.
Yeah, I do think to piggyback on what Pam and Sumi were saying, like we might want to just, if the question is whether or not we should also have a regular September meeting, I think a lot of it will depend on when the police task force finalizes their stuff. Like, for example, if they finalize the first week of September, I think it might be worth talking about it before it gets presented to city council, if the next time we're meeting isn't until the 23rd.
Yeah.
Or if they submit a report like 2 days after our retreat, like we might want to talk about it like sometime before our October meeting too. So I think we just have to be flexible and mindful that that might be coming out soon.
Okay. Okay.
I'm going to give a more full report later, but we will finish our work by the end of August. We've been mandated to do that. And we've been working very hard on that. So.
Okay. It sounds like we ought to go forward with the September 23 date, but be flexible, given the things that might impact it. And this might be only a partial strategic planning and something follow-up. Because there's an awful lot is going on in this city that may need to be addressed. Okay, well, then we will do that. I don't think we need, do we need a vote on that? No? Good. Is everybody comfortable with it, though, today? Okay.
Yes.
Trespass. You've all gotten, hopefully you all saw the new, I just sent out one today, another version of the trespass summary.
Is the trespass summary online? It wasn't in Register.
No, because it's a draft. It'll be online I think it'll be online. When it's finally finalized, we will make it available.
It would still need to be submitted to legal. That was one of the.
That's the next point,
the,
that's the next step, right?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and so it may not be online for a little bit.
You're right. But it's moving, and I think, yes, that's the next step. Is it ready for the next step? Because be aware, again, that this is not, it's not a final, it's a draft, but it's what we think we know, and now we'll find out if there's things we don't understand or that aren't clear. But I think it really helps us be aware of, we're all on the same page, I think, at least in terms of what we know, and maybe not how we feel about it, but what we know, and what questions need to be answered, and what kinds of things need to be done. So my question is it ready for legal?
I'm easy with everything that we have written. I just have a question, and I would like, since we have three attorneys on the commission. As I have shared before, this is such an odd, and I'm supposed to speak in this thing too.
It is.
And the people on the right and on the left of me, not politically, but anyway. I have shared before that one of my sons had a neighbor called the police on him while he was meditating in front of my house. And the police brought my son in the house. It was like 10 o'clock at night. Young black man with dreadlocks. Both of us being Quakers. Quakers are wont to meditate, but somehow they've made my neighbor nervous. So she calls the police, and the police brings them to the door, and the police say that this young man says that he is your son. And I said, yes, he is my son. And he says, sorry, but you never called, and I had to come. I had no trouble with the policeman, except the question is, could he have read trespass from a neighbor calling? She didn't own anything.
Yeah.
Can a neighbor call on property that she does not own?
Well, a neighbor can obviously call to ask, but no, I don't.
But he could not have been read trespass.
No.
That's my question.
The law says owner, co-owner, tenant, or agent of the owner. I mean, it's very specific. It's not passing
Okay.
people.
And I've shared this story umpteen times to various people. So now the question is, why did he even bring him to the door then? If she couldn't read trespass?
Why did he?
If he couldn't read trespass, why did he even bring him to the door? Why couldn't he just sit there if I hadn't called?
It's a good question. Especially when he told the police who he was.
Yeah. It's like, what was the problem? Legally. I know there was no problem morally. I'm asking what was the problem legally?
Or if he wasn't, I mean.
Can I just, if I see a young white man walking down the street, can I just call the police? And have the police come in and ask him, what is he doing walking on the street?
Well, my guess is if you, I don't know,
Well,
attorneys.
so what I would think would happen is that the police would say, what do you see this person doing? And you would say, he's just walking down the street. And the police would ask, can you describe any kind of particular behavior that is concerning to you? Well, no, he's just walking down the street. I would like to think that what the police would do in that situation, no matter what the race of the person, I will add, is say, you know, a person has a right to walk down the street in a public place, and so thank you for calling with your concern, or something like, you know what I mean? Police have to have probable cause in order to stop somebody.
So there
probable
was-
cause to believe that a crime has occurred.
There was no probable cause then.
I feel like there's probable cause to arrest or detain someone, but as we see in cases like the Philadelphia Starbucks, there was no probable cause that a crime had occurred. The store manager just wanted the men gone. There was no indication that either of the men had done anything. And the police didn't arrest those two men, but the police still came in response to a call that didn't name any suspicious behavior. And I think when Interim Chief Fannis came and spoke to us, he did indicate too that he didn't want to do anything to decrease the number of calls. That his priority was to not make it was to make it so that people felt comfortable calling, and not to chastise people into not making calls. So I think, especially if you were the sort of person to be fearful of Black people to begin with, I think you should definitely say they look suspicious.
I mean, I would.
We can move on.
All right. So what I would say to that is, right. So, you know, Terry versus Ohio. To get it, this is the difference between a stop and an arrest.
Yeah.
I would like to think that in that situation that the most the police would do is say, thank you for your call. They might come into the neighborhood, observe what the person is doing, and if they didn't observe anything problematic or suspicious in a way that they could articulate, that they would let the person move along, you know, without having an interaction with that person. Even. I mean, that's at least what the law says. I understand that what the law says and what the reality on the ground is sometimes different. But and I'm opining based on my former life as a prosecutor. That's how I would analyze the issue legally.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that we have to remember that Chief Fannis did actually say that there was this one prior instance where a call was made and he went up to, I think, a young Black man and had to speak to him and say that, you know, sorry, there was a call that you might have kidnapped your own child. This is clearly terrible, but I just wanted to let you know that there was a call made. I'm investigating. And so, like, even though, like, clearly Chief Fannis had assessed the situation and realized that nothing untoward was happening, he still approached an individual and said, I'm checking this out. Just to be clear, I don't think anything's wrong here, but I'm just letting you know. And so saying that a police officer might come and just not interact with the situation, I think is contrary to what we've actually heard happens.
Yeah. Right, and every situation is different too, Vivian. I mean, sometimes it'll happen, I'm guessing, and sometimes it won't. I mean, there's all kinds of stories nowadays that I've read. Actually, in the context that I read them these days, it's in usually higher ed publications of people eating lunch, people of color eating lunch in a place, and somebody calling in to report, you know, this person looks suspicious eating lunch here. Meanwhile, the person eating lunch was a community member, and campus police reported to question the person, and it turned into a real problem. It's like, you know, was the person eating while Black, you know, kind of thing. So, you know, obviously there are some things that need to, you know, that we need to continue to work on as a society, and that the police need to be mindful of. But, you know, one thing I've learned is that every situation is unique too, and it really, what the police decide to do, I think, depends on, you know, who the officer is and what the variety of circumstances are. And it's not particular. I don't know that they stop them every time. I think that you're right. Chief Fannis indicated that, yeah, sometimes that they will just have an interaction to check out what's going on and and it sounds like they try to do it in a way that's as non-invasive as possible, short of not having any interaction at all.
Yeah. I would hope that, though, that the police would, it sounds like in the instance that Chief Fannis gave, that helped. Explaining the situation helped. And I don't know if the policeman who talked to your son made that explanation also.
Yeah, I don't fault the policeman.
But the policeman should be able to say why, that it's their policy to follow up on any concern that anybody has.
Okay. I'm easy with what we've written, and we should move on.
This is clearly I think it's a very, it started by being an innocuous thing, and it is obviously not, and it's fraught with all kinds of things that could escalate in interactions in bad ways. So I'm glad we've done this far. So can we agree to accept this for the time being and send it on to legal for their comments? There are lots of questions on this, things that we want to check facts for, things we want them to explore.
I have a question. Are we talking about both documents or just?
No, I think we should talk about
Okay.
them separately.
Yeah.
So just with this summary, okay?
Yep.
Okay. How about the proposed changes to the trespass process, which is.
The trespass, I see.
I think it's the trespass notice form, I'm
Right,
sorry.
which is step one on the process.
It's
that's
step
right.
one on the process. And it's rougher because it's a proposal it's maybe only half there, but it's a beginning. Do you think that if we give this to legal and then ultimately to the police, that this will be an advantage?
I think it makes sense to start the conversation. This isn't the end of it, certainly, so
That's
it will at least give us some answers to things.
Okay. Do we need to vote on this, do you think? Or just send it through?
Yes?
I think we voted last time that as soon as we
We had,
thought
we
that it
really
was
did.
finalized and we all agreed that it was in shape, that we would send it along.
Okay, then they get it.
And it sounds like you've just confirmed that everybody is comfortable with it being in good enough shape to send along, right?
I think so.
Okay.
Okay, so that's done.
Just a question.
Sure.
Once legal has reviewed it and ideally returned it to us, I didn't see in here where this is something we've talked about, but it doesn't clearly lay out that this will then be subsequently turned over to the task force.
Well, I think we have to figure out where everything is at that point.
I thought our discussions were that we certainly wanted them to take up this issue. And I'm thinking out loud that perhaps they may want to weigh in on this since we're actually passing this on to them.
Well, but the task force is not the group, it's the policing commission.
I understand,
Yeah.
but the task force is now crafting language that the commission will ultimately become. So since we are saying that this is an issue that we want the commission ultimately to address, for me, it just says that the task force would want to have that information to incorporate with whatever else they're doing in developing the I don't know what to call it, but what would ultimately become the commission. I guess I'm asking, perhaps not clearly, but is this not something that we would want them to have, given the fact that this is what we want the commission to address, among other things?
To me,
This doesn't impact the ordinance that they are working on. This will be one of the projects that they will be working on. So I don't think in that way this is time sensitive, that they need to have this before the ordinance is done. Because right now what is being done is structuring the commission, right? This would go to that commission for them to work on how to transform or make trespass better, right? I mean.
Dwight, do you agree with that?
And I didn't share it with, I have not shared it because it has draft. And when I see draft on something, it means for my eyes only.
Yeah.
But I think it's helpful that someone, obviously, who's on the task force, I mean, multiple people who are on
Right.
the task force know that it's happening. I do think that once the commission gets started, like, we should be tapping them more into some of these conversations.
Oh, absolutely.
But hopefully at that point, we can make all of this more public too.
Yeah,
But yeah, I definitely think that's important.
yeah. And it sounds like they're they're stressed for time right now. And I'm gonna be happier once we know that it's right. I don't want us to pass by any kind of misconceptions and saddle them with that as well. Once we know that this is accurate, I'm thrilled to have it be circulated. Okay, I think we're now at Policing Task Force, progress report.
I'd like to add just one more thing. I want to thank both Linda and Vivian for the careful work that
Oh,
they did
yes.
on the draft. I looked at it too,
You did.
but I found that their work was particularly thoughtful and helpful.
Yeah, and Pam was up as well, by the way.
Oh.
I just slid her,
Oh,
because she
all
gave
right.
it to me orally.
I did.
Okay, got it. Thank you, too,
Right.
Pam.
Thank you. Definitely appreciate all the input, it made a big difference. Policing Task Force. Dwight, do you want to start?
So that, pardon me for forgetting your name. When you get old, you might forget names too.
Margaret.
Margaret, thank you. I have written out what I'm going to say. There may be reactions and questions from other people, and I would entertain them too. But you don't have to take notes, that's what I'm saying here.
Lloyd is giving it up.
In a series of meetings, we have listened to the counsel of several community members and received written statements from 3 identifiable social action groups dedicated to social justice: Transforming Washtenaw, the Coalition Against White Supremacy, and Ann Arbor Friends Quaker Meetings Social Action Committee. I cannot speak to the silence of other groups and congregations. I personally am committed to accepting the best suggestions, no matter the source. As a Quaker who believes in mining my own experiences as well as using both personal research, that of others, and noting informed opinions, I continue to study the relevancy of encounters with law enforcement officers and their political supervisors. These include my own experiences from the point of view of someone who spent 7 formative years without a home to call my own, and all of my high school years living in the projects. As an adult, I have spent 28 years as a CEO and more than 40 years as a board member, maybe half of those as a chair. I consider my perspectives as well as those of close relatives who are citizens and/or professional law enforcement officers. Until the end of this month, there will be no finalization on any of several articles before us aimed at establishing an ordinance. I am convinced that this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If we don't do it right this time, it may be 30 or 40 years before it comes up again. We have received letters from the president of the Police Officers Association and the city attorney. The Ann Arbor Police Officers Association accepts the coming commission and is concerned about the disconnect between AAPD, City Council, and the public. The city attorney has shared his legal opinions of the limit of a community policing commission. We don't share all of those, and we have attorneys on the task force too. Throughout this process,
Dwight,
yes,
can I add, would you prefer that we wait to ask questions? till
yes,
after
because
you're
I'm
done?
almost finished.
Yes, okay.
Throughout this process, I have said accountability is in 3 camps. I encourage a model that recognizes AAPD reports to the city administrator, who reports to city council, and the public pays the salaries of all. The buck starts with the community, the only unpaid participants. If we don't address the community's role in building justice into our fabric, the dance will end with all falling down. Everywhere except in a police state, the police are in the middle. Now, comments and questions.
David.
Thank you, Dwight. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Dwight. You mentioned that there were some differences of opinion about what the legal limitations of the board will be, or the commission will be. Are you able to discuss what some of those are, what the task force is hoping for, and what some of the concerns are about
I can
limitations?
I can speak to that in general terms, but first, my wife is Jewish, and I have heard many times from her mouth and from others who practice that faith that if you put two Jews in the same room, there would be three different opinions. We have all kinds of attorneys in our family. She is an attorney. My son, one of her sons, and one of my daughters-in-law. If you put those four in the same room, you will have 8 different opinions. So there's always disagreements. You know that. You're one of those attorneys in this room.
I'm afraid so.
Yes, you are. We want the community to have more power than the community currently does have, and perhaps more than the charter says. I expect that we're going to ask for there to be some changes in the charter. The city attorney would prefer that there be no changes in the charter, and I'm speaking in general terms. Most of us on the task force are not convinced that Ann Arbor is a perfect place. Therefore, change is something that we welcome. I don't know if I answered that question to your satisfaction, and assuming you're sitting in that room every day, I am. Well, but you're not sitting in the. We do a lot of work outside, just as the Human Rights Commission does, more than I expected. But anyway,
yes, but like one of the issues that has taken a lot of time in the last couple of meetings is on subpoena powers, whether the police commission should have subpoena powers, or would we not? We don't need that because we can have arbitration. So that has been kind of, people have fallen on both sides of the issue of can a police task force actually have teeth without subpoena powers, and a discussion. As a city council member I don't have voting rights, I'm more like a liaison and kind of sounding board. Yeah, I think sometimes they do use me as a sounding board, and I keep telling them they need to put, even if it's aspirational, what they expect, what they want out of that. I don't want the commission to self-censor, or if we ask this, they'll think we are asking too much, so we shouldn't. So I have been encouraging them to say whatever they want, because that's their duty. That's why the community set it up, so that they tell the city council what it is that the community expects out of that, right? It's not their own personal preference or judgment. And we did have an election, and I think there is going to be political, there is going to be political changes and political will to carry out what the people want. And I'm more hopeful now than 2 days ago. So
now I want to underline what Sumi has said, and I see Vivian would like to speak too. It is a clear sense of the task force at this time to be aspirational. We had to work to get there because there were some others who did not think that was a wise way to go about business. It is also helpful for us to know that the room is always filled. And not only is the room always filled, people do not bite their tongues. And there has been a good deal of tension. One woman approached me, our last meeting was last week, and she said, I've never seen so much stress in a room. Now, this woman was not, I'm going to use a phrase that we used when I was growing up, a spring chicken. But it was a lighter weight meeting than it had been before. And if she'd been there the previous 2 or 3, she might have had a heart attack. But I feel very good about people speaking their piece. And frankly, I didn't think Ann Arbor had it in, I must say us, because I'm paying taxes, in us to be as forthright as we have been.
So I've gone to many of the police task force meetings myself, as has Jordan. And from my perspective, it seems to me that subpoena power has been a big legal issue. Another issue has been they've asked the city attorney to prepare a memo about the collective bargaining agreements and how that might bump up against some of the ordinance. For example, when officers can be brought in for questioning, and like when the timeline of things can progress, and how quickly the commission can move in if the CBAs say that everything has to hold and wait up until they've completed an internal investigation. And so they've looked into that, and I believe that they're also looking into the fact that the charter also says that any commission members, any city commission and board members have to be volunteers and serve on an unpaid basis, which obviously is a huge deterrent to some of the communities that we want to see represented on the eventual commission. So I think those are 3 of the bigger legal issues that they're considering and have been discussing internally.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you.
Yes. Yes. And those are about what we expected. I mean, so you're doing the right things.
I have a question. Having been involved from the beginning when the Human Rights Commission subcommittee took up this task of even making the recommendation for having a police oversight review board, we have long discussed, not with any regularity or in-depthness, but it certainly came up, the idea of what it would look like and should there be some compensation. So my question speaks to, has that option been explored either from council, or has it been discussed by the task force to address other options outside of the city, compensating individuals who will ultimately make up the commission, specifically grant monies? I seem to recall there being an individual who presented to the HRC stating that they would be more than willing to address that and had resources for obtaining compensation for ultimately those who will comprise the commission. So my question speaks to the what efforts, if any, have been engaged in by the task force to address compensation for those individuals who will ultimately make up the commission.
I cannot recall us talking about the commission itself being paid, even as the Human Rights Commission is not being paid. A concern for a youth committee that would be an adjunct, there being some funds to help them, that has been discussed. That's not one of the places on the when we look at the charter, that's not one of the places that I have heard people wanting to challenge. The commission would be volunteers. However, we definitely have talked about a budget for them. And you heard me say this over the years, and I'll continue to say it. When I talk to people about us having in Ann Arbor a Human Rights Commission that has no budget, they are in shock. I cannot imagine having the police commission, oversight commission, having no budget, and none of us can see that. It's totally unacceptable, so.
I have another question. I know that initially, as a Human Rights Commission, we wanted human rights representation on the task force, and thank you for doing that for us, Dwight. But have you guys discussed whether or not there will be a Human Rights Commission liaison to the eventual commission, and if that will be a voting or a non-voting spot?
We're talking about discussion. Nothing has been finalized. I'm going to use one of my least favorite words, but you hear it all the time in the 21st century. There will be robust participation from the Human Rights Commission in the Police Oversight Commission. So, yeah, we're clear on that.
We're robust.
Yeah. Thanks for not asking me to define what robust means.
Other questions?
So I think that composition of the task force is something, not the task force, composition of the eventual Police Oversight Commission is something that several members of the task force have been struggling with, especially the role of who chooses, right? Because especially in choosing the task force, it was sort of weird in the sense that we got the first cut and then presented a slate, and the mayor also presented a slate. But I think right now they're potentially grappling with whether or not they want to stick to a model similar to that, or whether or not they're looking at city council appointing or multiple bodies appointing having multiple slates. And I think it's worth considering at this point if the Human Rights Commission would want to take that sort of role up again for populating the eventual commission as we did for the task force.
Well, we are definitely discussing that. We're discussing that this morning, the small group that met, the composition.
So if one of the propositions on the table is whether or not the Human Rights Commission wants to be involved, I think it's worth us discussing whether or not we think it's a good idea, because I don't think they can force that duty on us if we don't agree with it. But would we want to be involved in appointing members to the Police Oversight Commission? Does anyone have thoughts?
Do we know how they're going to, is there any plan now drafted about?
I think there are multiple plans
Yeah.
out there is the thing, and I think this is one of the ideas that are floating out there. But obviously, I don't think the idea is going to work if we all say just no, we have no interest in doing that,
So
right?
you're asking if we would, if asked, would we do it?
Would we consider it? Yes.
Yeah.
Would we be interested in it, given that we've been so involved?
Okay.
Yeah, as you guys all can see, Miss Laurie Saginaw is right here. So if you have any direct questions or you want her to know that these are the issues that I think she is the person and she's right here, so she's all ears, I can see that.
Yeah.
Are you having any trouble with our discussing this question?
I'm overjoyed.
Oh, good.
Laurie, why don't you come to the podium and let them know if you're thinking about whether it's appointed or elected or whether it's...
Well, thanks. First, thank you for being so instrumental in bringing all of this to the point that it now exists. It's an unbelievable journey. I had no idea what this was going to be like, what it is like for all of you to sit where you sit, talk into that microphone, be recorded, be restricted from talking to each other outside of this room. I now appreciate you to a degree that I never imagined. And I already appreciated you. All that Dwight has shared is absolutely an accurate indication of where things are. We will be drafting proposed revisions to the template from which we have been working meticulously bit by bit. And we will be discussing composition soon. because we only have 3 more meetings. So this has to be dealt with head-on, and it is true that we would very much like to propose a model that is a departure from what has traditionally gone on in Ann Arbor, and we feel that it's appropriate because this commission is a departure. It is unique in so many ways because it really addresses the issues of race divide, class divide, and so many other divides that exist in the reality of our community. And that speaks to how frank the discussions have been. So I too rejoice in the fact that there can be public conversations, sometimes heated, about race and class and other divisive identities in our community. This is a very, very important step forward. This commission, as we envision it, can be so representative of an evolution in how the community engages with the city, and specifically with the police. But in relation to the city, it would be the manner in which nominations come forward, the manner in which review takes place, and the manner in which appointments are made. Because in this particular body, the representation of people who are not like any of you or me or anyone else on the task force is so critical to the work. And so we've been thinking and thinking since the day we began of how we are going to achieve that. And so we have looked at other jurisdictions. We've looked at different models. We've looked specifically in Michigan at Kalamazoo and Muskegon. We've looked at Albany, New York. These are examples that stand out to us as viable alternative ways of populating the commission. Now, in the case of the work to be done, there is a clear obstacle to sitting in a meeting like this, having binders full of information, being recorded and shown on television that precludes some people from being comfortable to do that. They may have a mental health challenge. They may have been formerly in jail. They may be undocumented. There are any number of reasons why they would have a barrier to serving in this format. We do not want them to not be able to participate and contribute to this work because their voice and their perspective is exactly relevant to what the commission needs. So we've also devised lots of ways that can be
Facilitate.
realized.
Okay.
Yeah, and one way would be to have an advisory sort of council that would be convened, would be sought out and convened by the commission. The commission would establish its own rules. This would not be a voting body. They would not be necessarily volunteers as is dictated by commissioners in the charter. But they would be considered to be part of the commission's function. The role of youth in relation to police, we know is absolutely, I don't know what adjective to put at it. It is like a bomb.
Critical.
Yes, it is it is imminent disaster if we do not begin to address the perception of the police by youth of color in this community and the interactions that go on. Because the first time that this happens to a youth of color, they are forever changed. And we can do something about that. So the function of youth on this commission is another very complicated consideration that we have been wrestling with. The youth that we want are not the youth who can afford not to have a job, who can afford not to study for the SATs if they are so fortunate, who normally drive a car, who, et cetera, et cetera. These are typically youth who are short on resources and short on support. But it's their voices, their experiences, and their perspectives that we do not have. And if the commission doesn't seek them out and utilize them, then we're in the dark.
Lori, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So you mentioned wanting to seek alternatives to the current system. By that, do you mean alternatives to the system where the mayor currently accepts applications and then appoints people individually?
Yes.
And what other sorts of systems is the task force considering? What would you?
You mean the point of why you asked me to stand up here? That's what you want?
Maybe. But what do you envision?
You shouldn't do that, because we haven't taken anything to the whole. And to talk about details that we have not agreed upon, I have problems with that. I understand everybody wanting to know more details, but we haven't voted on anything, and it's all still in the formulation. So I'm sorry for speaking out, but
That's okay. What I will say is that everything that we do is either posted on Legistar or it is posted on our Facebook page. So
And it's video.
even the revisions that we are proposing are actually out there. So we haven't operated under the belief that if we haven't adopted it, that it can't be shared publicly. But there are a variety of models out there that involve utilizing community organizations and other groups who can broaden the outreach for nominations. And there are various ways of dividing up the reviewing, the creation of slates, and the actual nomination and appointment.
let me, I'm going to use an analogy that, as a Quaker, I prefer not to use, but it may be helpful. There are bombs out there, and we are going to be hit by shrapnel. There's no way for us to avoid that, because there are hundreds of different models, and whatever we come up with is going to be a hybrid. When we speak about things, if we start getting into specificity, there are going to be people who will say, well, oh, you said that you were going to do this. You understand what I'm saying? And I haven't voted on anything, and I'm holding whatever little vote I have until the very end, because new truth is coming in every single day. So how that's going to be woven into the fabric is open. I've got a meeting tomorrow morning with some people who want to see me. Do I think that I'm going to have exactly the same mindset tomorrow after I've met with them that I have right now? No, I don't, because I'm always being influenced. I've worked on, I don't know how many projects in my life, but this may be the most difficult one that I have ever been a piece of, because we have encouraged people to raise hell. and they are doing it. And people who don't know how to bite their tongues, people who are always doing research, and there are 400 or 500 different models. So how are we going to address this? It's exciting if you like excitement. Howsoever, as Granddaddy would say, it's also prickly, okay, right? And again, excuse me for interrupting you, but I have down in my own position as being a Human Rights Commissioner too on that committee. So I'm wearing more than 2 hats. Because I can't go anywhere without wearing the hat of being a black man and being a father and a grandfather and an uncle and sitting on the top of a large family and having responsibilities for all of them and carrying that. And one of the things that I shared, and Sumi touched on it, our commissions tend to be selected from people who are well educated. And Ann Arbor is the best educated place in the United States, so the newspaper claims. But we're talking about degrees, we're not talking about spiritual education. As I shared in a meeting this morning, my grandfather, one of my grandfathers, the one I knew, he had gone to school 1 month, 6 consecutive years. But he worked for the mafia for over 30 years. I'm talking about it because he got busted by the FBI. And when I was 4 years old, so I've been able to talk about it most of my life. He knew a hell of a lot more about the police than I do, right? Okay. I also think he was more intelligent than I am, but he would never be on that police commission the way we are set up in this city. Lori's touched on it, Sumi's touched on it. We need to have those voices. A gentleman asked us, and I told my wife this was funny. He said, how many of you have been incarcerated on hogback? And nobody could put their hand up. This is on the task force. And then he says to us, how many of you have had handcuffs on? Only one could say that. I said to my wife that night, I said, it's amazing. I worked my life not to be in that position. And I lose face because I haven't been in that position. But my father has, and all my brothers have, and my nephews are in jail now. It's like, okay, we've got to hear these people, and we've got to be compassionate, and we cannot be bound by what Ann Arbor has done in the past or what anybody else has done in the past. Yeah. So,
I think it's important if there are several different options that are being considered for us as a commission to confront whether or not we definitely don't want to roll in this. Because if we don't want to roll in this, that's off the table completely. It's up to the task force to decide who plays a role in this. But I think we need to decide whether or not we want to opt in, whether or not we want to opt out at all. And for my part, I think based on my personal experience on the subcommittee for selecting the task force and based on all the work that we put into selecting the members of the task force, I think that I would like to see the Human Rights Commission continue to have some role in the process. I thought that we chose a really thoughtful slate of candidates, of nominees for the task force, and I was somewhat disappointed in the other slate that was put up. I think that we understand a lot of these concerns that Dwight is putting up, and I trust us. And I would like to see the Human Rights Commission have a role.
I think we're very anxious to be a part of this. We wrote the report. We've done a lot of the research. Many of us have gone, and many of us have been watching. So any way you want to use us. I mean, one of the things we have been doing is looking at it pretty in terms of the systems and how it works, rather than as advocates for one group or one thought or another. We're very, I think our bottom line is that we find something that really works for the community, that really, that makes sure that the police process is transparent and that it's consensual. That we've sort of, as a community, we contract for a certain level of police, and we're not uniform, so that some people have different ideas of what level we're talking about. But somehow, we have to come together and come up with a process that we agree is better. And so we can vote on that, but.
Before we take a vote, and I would like for us to do it, we as a Human Rights Commission need to know that they respect us a great deal, that we are respected like no other commission here in this city. And so if we were to opt out, there would be many, many vibrations.
Yeah.
I can't imagine us doing it, but I just.
Well, we wrote ourselves into the report.
Yeah, that's true. And I think, but I also think that it's helpful to know when people respect you, because a lot of times you don't know. You do know when you're disrespected, but you don't know when people respect you, and they respect us. So.
Jordan?
I realize that I cannot vote, but I would really like to see the commission do this.
Well, we don't know what this is, but maybe we
I
gotta-
seem to recall, I think we did in our report, although I'm not 100% sure, at least in one draft, maybe the final draft, it does include us either as a liaison or a voting member.
Right.
And, I mean, I'm not sure I feel strongly about which one, but I'd like to, I think we, at least at one point, we're all in agreement that we thought that the HRC should have one role or the other with respect to the police commission.
So I will add, I don't know why it would have to be either or. I think if the task force sees fit to recommend the Human Rights Commission involvement either as a selector of commission members and or to have a member from the commission serve as a liaison officially, voting, non-voting, whatever the task force decides is wise to put into the charter, which ultimately, my understanding is has to be approved by city council. But, my own personal view is, I, as a human rights commissioner, would welcome whatever rules the task force deemed appropriate for us to undertake.
Yeah. Any disagreement with that?
No.
I think we're all in favor. And
Music to my ears.
Yes, please. We really wanted two people as members of the task force, and we were voted down. But the reason we were voted down, according to the mayor, was that he saw that we had a large contribution before and a large one after, and so he didn't think it was necessary. But if you want to use us, I think we're all willing to be used.
Well, we're thinking way into the future. So we're imagining this commission living on beyond any of us,
Yes.
beyond any mayor,
Yes.
beyond the problem.
Lori, I just want to thank you so much for
Thank you.
Really, it's a huge thing you're doing, so thank you.
And
Thank
I
you.
know those meetings are
Mutual.
very
Mutual
difficult.
thank you. It's a love fest. What can I say?
So I do have one more, I have another question to ask if
Sure.
there's time. And I want to make sure I ask this the right way. It's a delicate question. I recognize that there are different views in the community about the police work. And indeed, I even think, based on my own experience and conversations I've had with people, that there are even differences of opinion with individual people about certain things that the police do well and certain things that the police don't do well. There's just a lot of diversity of opinion. As we went through the process of working with Hillard Hines and that part of the process, I was not involved early on because I was not on the commission early on. I was very hopeful that what would come out of the task force in terms of the proposed ordinance that would lay a foundation for the commission itself was that, yes, this would be a group that would look in a constructively critical way at aspects of what the police department and perhaps individual officers did. But at the same time, I was also hopeful that the commission would turn out to be a body that really would move forward as a positive community force too. I think that there is a lot of potential for some positive, constructive synergy between the community, and I'll just say the community writ large, and the police, and within the community, individuals within the community to foster, and the police to have constructive, positive relationships. I understand that there have been problems, but I guess I'd like to hear your impressions, Dwight, and Sumi, and Lori, and Vivian, you've attended a lot of the meetings, I have not, about what you think about that. Is there going to be, is this going to be, in your view, is it shaping up to be something where there will be some positive, constructive work done, as opposed to just an us versus them, and we have to fight, and it is going to just be kicking and screaming all the way well into the life of this commission, to put it bluntly. I'm interested to hear your thoughts about that.
If I can speak from a personal perspective, I think my thoughts on the police commission and the task force have been clear in the past, but my involvement with the task force meetings and some of the work that's happened now has led me to do a police ride-along along with Jordan, and also attend an informational meeting that was led by Jason Forsberg, Deputy Chief Jason Forsberg. I'm sorry, Forsberg, if you're listening. It was a really informational, several hours long meeting, and we had a really informational ride-along experience too, which was one of multiple ride-alongs I've had in the course of my career. And I think that it seemed clear to me that one of the reasons me and Jordan were interested in doing this is because a lot of these experiences have been made available to task force members. And there's been a lot of exchange of information, open exchange of information. And I think Deputy Chief Forsberg has been particularly good at reaching out to people and making himself extremely available for any questions, any concerns, and any information sharing that needs to happen. So it seems from my perspective, at least, that this has at least fostered some productive conversation and information sharing beyond just an us versus them perspective. And that it seems to me too that the task force is interested in not just being a backwards looking incident review panel, but also looking at policy and looking at looking forward and being a broader commission as well.
Any other answers?
I will, but would you like to precede me?
One of my mentors was a professor I had when I was in college, and he made a statement that has affected me all of my life. He said, anytime I have a student who receives less than a B-, I have failed. That was part of my philosophy 41 years in the classroom. One time then I didn't fail, because that was the only time that I had everybody who had at least a B- in that class. I say all that to say that us versus them is not something I can deal with as a human being. We are all in this together. If the police failed, then I have failed. What I want is for us to have a stronger community. That's what I said from jump. It's the only reason I was willing to do this. I am not somebody that is convinced that all policemen are bad. I can't buy that. If I could, I've got two nephews who are cops, and one of my best friends is a detective. So how am I going to buy into that? They are working for us. And so if things are going wrong, then we have to own some of that responsibility. It's not us versus them. Now, can I say, honestly, that everybody in the room when we discuss this believes the same way? No, I can't say that. I've spoken to people who don't believe that we should have any police. I ain't one of them. And I've called on the police time and time again when I needed the police. When I had to deal with the Ku Klux Klan in Kentucky, when they were about to attack us, did I call on prayer? I called on the cops. So, no, it's not us versus them. So, now, Laura, you may want to say something else.
Sumi? Thank you for raising that. I think that it's easy to perceive in the heated debates that we've had that could be an outcome. I thank the universe every day for Dwight being on the task force and saying what he does say, an unabashed Quaker. I also personally believe that human engagement is the only solution to problems, which is partly why this struggle about subpoena power over mediation and arbitration is difficult for me. But what I have learned by being in this role is that there are truths out there that are not mine. There are many truths out there. And I do not have a distrust of the police because I many times have gone through a yellow light and a red light at the end of that and not been stopped. I am treated well when I'm pulled over. I have gone to court and been able to argue my ticket. So I don't have the experience of people who have been harmed or humiliated or damaged irreparably by a police interaction. And what I've come to understand is that to expect those people to believe that learning more about the police is going to enable them to trust them is not possible. The only way that trust happens is that it's earned. Things change in a way that demonstrate that trust is possible. And for many people, given what they have been taught over generations, given what the national media shows us, given the experiences that they have had in Ann Arbor, they are not open to trusting until they see that this commission actually works in a way that is respectful and responsive to them. So that is the first job. And until that happens, the idea of improving the image of the police through the commission is not viable. That will happen over time as the practices and the policies and the training that will all be the focus of the commission in a proactive way change. And the commission undoubtedly will have a relationship with the police department, a very collaborative relationship. But the commission cannot be seen as a public relations firm for the police or as an apologist for the police. The commission has to be seen as independent of the police, of the city, and able to respond to the community. So a big part of the commission's initial job is to demonstrate that and also to really do an active job of getting out in the community and helping people to understand that they exist, what the process will be, how easy it will be to make a complaint to them. Now, what I didn't get to mention is that one of the sticking points besides subpoena is a real issue that we have to address, which is the complainant's sense of safety in making a complaint, and whether the complainant, if the complaint is against an officer, can remain anonymous and can not trigger an internal investigation within the department in such a way that there is a basis for retaliation. So we have been told that there is no evidence of retaliation in situations like that. But just because there is no evidence, it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. And it certainly does not mean that the fear of retaliation is not real. And that's what we have to grapple with. So those are some of the complications.
Thank you all. Those were for all of you for your thoughtful answers to that question. You know, I will just say on the retaliation point, so my day job is I work for the Office for Institutional Equity at the university. And I deal primarily with two, ordinances. Really, they're standard practice guidelines. It's a university policy. There's a sexual harassment policy, and then there is a discrimination and harassment policy. And built right into those policies are statements that retaliation against people who file complaints will not be tolerated, and indeed are separate violations of university policy.
Well, let's set up a meeting.
I'd be happy to talk with you. I can also send you links to those policies. And it seems to me that I don't know whether there would be the task force building this into the ordinance, or whether this would be something that the commission would later build into their own processes. That's for you all to, I think, decide and figure out. But I see no harm. If it's true, if it's true, hypothetically, if it's true that no retaliation ever occurs, then it seems to me that no one could object to a non-retaliation provision being put in, because it would just never be used, right? But that's a glib way of saying I just don't see a downside to having a provision like that, whether it be in the ordinance or promulgated by the commission once it's seated and approved by city council, if that's the process that would need to take place.
I agree with everything that the two of you have said, and I may not be saying anything new that you haven't heard. Maybe I will say one thing. I do have two nephews who are policemen, but I also have lost a first cousin and a second cousin who were killed by policemen. And my best friend, when I was 18, was brutalized by the police, and he ended up dying shortly after that. So one of the reasons I was willing to take on the chair of the committee that was looking at this was because I can see many different perspectives. I don't believe that there is any such thing as objectivity, but I'm trying my best to be objective. I don't believe that it serves anybody to demonize another people. And I have lived in this society all of my life, and I have been demonized. So for me to do that to somebody who I am paying, it makes no sense. If I don't expect anything good from you, why should you give me anything good? I mean, that's like common sense to me. That is not accepted universally. And I understand very well why that trust is not there. I'm not even saying that I do trust. What I'm saying is I want to expect the best from you until you show me something else. One of the themes that keeps coming up is Ann Arbor police will say, well, we are not like others. Those of us who live in this world, most of us have lived in other places, and we carry all of that herstory or history with us. We carry it. We do not want to focus on the police force in Ann Arbor as it exists right now in 2017, 18. We are trying to build something that will last 40, 50 years up the road. So I don't want the police to take this personally. And I want to be a model. I want to be a model for this country. Because none of my kids or my nephews live in this town. They live elsewhere. If we could export something somewhere else, I'm not talking about a franchise where we can make McDonald's money, but if we can export something somewhere else, that's the only reason to do it, I think.
If we can't do it, who can? I mean, you know.
But I think, I'm sorry, to go back to something of some of what Lori was saying, I think that, not that I think that you're suggesting this, but to the extent that there has been heated discussion, there has been a lot of heated discussion. Sure. These have been quite vibrant meetings, but I think that they have been incredibly useful in shaping the discourse and giving us a read on what the community thinks. And I've been consistently very impressed by the input from individual members of the community and from some of the groups that have been extremely active in the sort of constructive feedback and some of the questions that have been posed. And I think that, you know, sometimes distrust and sort of that heated discussion, like one, I don't think tone impacts the substance of the suggestions that are being made. And that two, like we do want there to be this sort of sense of vigilance, right? That people are watchful and engaged and like really waiting for something to happen, because that ensures that we have a really engaged community that like is committed to this body succeeding. And so I have sat through a lot of these meetings, and some of them have been very exciting. But I think a lot of them have been really useful and have given the task force a lot to think about.
So if I could say one last thing in regard to composition. The task force has taken heat for the membership. We have been challenged about our privilege and our limited understanding of the experiences of some members of this community, and rightfully so. So the optics of this future commission, how it looks to the community, what the faces are, is extremely important, especially for this first commission. There is so much that will be on this first commission's shoulders. And we're actually, as a task force, creating a proposal for the city administrator and for city council of ideas that we have for the first commission and how to support them in ways that probably won't be necessary after that. But I guess we just can't stop from wanting to midwife this birth. But I would say that that's part of the reason for us needing the wide outreach for nominations, why we need to seek nominations and applications from all parts of the community and do it very systematically and make the application process accessible, make it in different languages, make it not just written, but it can consist of an interview upon request. So we're actually thinking of all the creative ways that so many more individuals can raise their hand with interest to contribute than we ever imagined.
Thanks for coming, Laura.
My pleasure.
Yes. Very helpful. Anything else on, we are done with our agenda.
I move to adjourn.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, folks.